hell that is.
¿Qué chingados es eso? So my daughter went to Oberlin.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of Latinx there.
Oh, yeah?
And I asked her, I said, how many Latinx students are there? She said, not too many.
Yeah, my daughter at Cal, Berkeley, she said, like, that todo loco ahí.
I'm a Latin Y.
Yeah.
Not Latin Y.
Why?
Why the bring me here?
Yeah, no kidding. Really funny experiences when I was running for office in San Francisco as a conservative,
Yeah?
Oh, yeah, twice. I ran for board of supervisors.
Were you just like going for the Hail Mary?
No, I thought I had a good chance.
In San Francisco?
In San Francisco. I came in 7th out of the top 6.
Welcome to the Border Wars podcast. This is a special episode of the podcast. First of all, we are the #1 podcast in all of the Americas, the only bilingual podcast that takes you beyond the border. This is Hispanic Heritage Month, and I think this is a good time to talk about something that doesn't get talked about in not just the media. I think in general, when they talk about Latinos in the U.S. and things like that, they tend not to talk about Latinos in the armed forces. And I have two individuals that are here with me: Manny Rosales from Nicaragua, Sergio de la Peña from Mexico, both proud Americans, both proud origins from Latin America, and both veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces from different generations, from the Vietnam era to the Cold War. And then, obviously I'm a veteran as well from kind of the War on Terror era. And so we're going to talk all about that. But I want to kick this off. First of all, how you guys doing?
Doing great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Absolutely.
Do we say Happy Hispanic Heritage Month? Is that a thing? Or?
No, I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah, it's like, you haven't had anyone call to you be like Happy Hispanic?
No. Tequila time.
Tequila time.
I mean, and when I was in the Army early on, we would always celebrate the 16th of September if you wanted to. And so that was, I believe, the origins of how we ended up with Hispanic Month in September.
Oh, is that what it is?
Oh,
Well,
wow.
it's also
It's from the Army?
Yeah, in the Army they would promote Hispanic Month, or it wasn't even Hispanic Month.
I was going to ask, why is this month Hispanic Heritage Month?
Well, the other thing is that a lot of the
Mexicanos.
well, not only that. If you look at
16th of September, el grito,
there's that, but in Chile it's also celebrated about the same time because when the Spaniards were losing Latin America, it happened in the summer. It started in July and it ended about September. And so it's just kind of the bulk of how many countries got their independence about that time frame.
A lot of them.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
And why every Hispanic Heritage Month, the only thing I see is taco nights. Like all throughout. Yeah. You could be like in a Puerto Rican neighborhood and it's taco night.
Yeah, even in San Antonio with Jill Biden, taco
So it's every night taco night.
Every night taco night, man.
We're all tacos in that sense. And we're talking with Sergio de la Peña and Manny Rosales because you guys are some of the most distinguished gentlemen that I know that are both veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces and also successful entrepreneurs or defense officials. You served in the Trump administration at the highest levels in the Pentagon, and you served in the Bush administration at the highest levels of the Small Business Administration. And I think being that it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and we talked a little bit before about what that means, Sergio educated us, because for us ignorant Latinos, we didn't even know why they celebrated at this point in time. But anyhow, I think what it means is Latinos have contributed to society here in the United States in ways that often aren't even discussed. It's always kind of like talks about in terms of the restaurants and this and the food and the culture. But I want to talk about the U.S. military because the three of us are Latinos. The three of us have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. The three of us have all taken that oath of office, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think that it's interesting because it's evolved over time. I mean, Manny, tell us about your time because you were during the Vietnam era, right?
Yeah, I was drafted.
Okay.
I didn't join.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I didn't even, you have to register for the draft when you turn 18 at that time.
Okay.
And I didn't.
Okay. How did they draft you then?
Oh, because they came knocking on my door.
Okay.
All of a sudden, this is the FBI. I said, really?
Yeah. The FBI was the one that
knocked on my door and I said, you have to, you know that you have to.
The Selective Service.
Select whatever it was. So I had to sign up right away. Yeah. And but going back to the military aspect of it, I have to tell you a story that why I'm here.
Yeah.
It's because I'm not the first guy, not the first Rosales. My father came from Nicaragua back in the in the 40s because an uncle of his told him, look, there's an opportunity to work in San Francisco. Why don't you come up here and get some work? I was just born. So he left Nicaragua on I guess it was a tourist visa or a work visa. He got here back in 1943, 44.
From Nicaragua?
From Nicaragua.
You went straight to San Francisco?
He went to San Francisco, and he was there because his uncle had, some connections. He was going to be working there. And then 6 months later, he gets a letter from the government of the United States. Welcome. It was greetings from the President of the United States.
Okay. Who was the president at the time? Roosevelt, yeah.
He got drafted. He was drafted. 6
Greetings. Thank you for coming here.
Greetings from the President of the United States. So he was drafted.
What year was this again?
44.
Was World War II still?
World War II.
Yeah.
It was going full blast. Yeah. So he got drafted, and then he got sent over to Germany in Patton's division. He was over there in the occupation, and then he came back 1945, 46. But because he was there, unbelievably, he couldn't believe that he survived because there was a lot of immigrants that were in the same situation that they drafted. They sent them over there.
So let me just elaborate a little bit on that because this is an important data point. There was an arrangement made between the government of Mexico and the government of the United States because at the time most Hispanics were of Mexican descent, but you were close enough.
A little further south.
So a little further south, but that's okay. And so the agreement was that if you're a green card holder and a U.S. resident, you're vulnerable for the draft, which is still the case today if we ever have a draft again. Yeah. So even though you're a citizen of another country, it didn't matter because if you're here as a permanent resident, you went to the war. I had uncles that did the same thing. Yeah. They thought, well, we're not going to get drafted.
But he got his card in 3 months.
But there was roughly, I can't get the precise numbers, but it was about 250,000 people that went into World War II that were part of that.
Were residents?
They were residents, and then they went off to war. Before 9/11,
how many were nationalities? Do you know? Like
mostly, remember, most were Mexican because Hispanics back in those days were the predominant Hispanic group.
So your dad was probably one of the few Nicaraguans.
Well, he says there was Puerto Ricans and
Puerto Ricans are Americans.
Americans, right? So, but there was a lot of Latinos and some other Asians and nationalities, but not like mostly Latinos. Yeah. But he had no clue.
Mostly of Mexican origin. Even today, if you look at Hispanics across the United States, those of Mexican origin were about 62%.
Yeah,
right.
Still the majority.
So the bottom line is he got drafted, and so because of that,
he served in World War II.
World War II. So he's a World War II vet. They sent him back, and they gave him citizenship.
Yeah.
So that's why I was so fortunate to be here because he.
And then they got the second Rosales.
He brought everybody.
I know.
So he brought my mother and I. We came back.
But then they drafted you.
Exactly. I get to that, but they came back, and he brought my mom and myself, and then his mother and his.
Oh, so when he was in the war, you were in Nicaragua.
I was in Nicaragua. Okay. My mother and I would, living there, with the family there. But then I came, and I was 4.
Okay.
But I came almost 5.
Okay.
And
you remember this?
Oh yeah. Really? He told me the story about him being drafted and all of that. But I remember coming here, right? Because I was 4, almost 5.
Good memory.
Kindergarten, right? So the bottom line is that that's why we were fortunate to come. Because he basically got drafted. He became a U.S.
He literally had to go to war. So you guys can come to America.
So we came to America and everything, and then San Francisco Bay Area and everything, and then
why did he choose San Francisco?
Because that's where there was a lot of Nicaraguans in San Francisco at that time.
Where the work was.
Yeah, there was a work because of the ports.
Okay.
Because of the war, right?
Yeah.
So he came, and there was at that time in San Francisco, L.A. were the biggest spots for Nicaraguans, El Salvador, Central Americans in general. Not Miami. That came after.
That came later. That's
Ortega,
Cold War.
Cold War, right? So 20 years later, actually 18 years later, I get drafted.
It's crazy.
They knock on the door, and they draft me, and it's.
What did your dad think when you got drafted?
He says, "Oh my God, good luck. You're on your own. You're on your own, brother." But at least I spoke English, right?
That's true.
So I kind of knew what was going on, and so they basically put me in Oakland. That's the processing center, and then I went to Fort Ord.
Okay.
And Fort Ord.
Is that what you did basic?
That's what I did basic. And at the time I go to Fort Ord, there's a meningitis outbreak. I mean, guys are, dying, and so we have to sleep outside. We got, we can't go to church. We have to go, do the church in the streets or in the woods, and you can't even go out to out of the base. You were quarantined because there was spreading. So it was really something crazy.
What the hell?
And then from there, I was sent overseas.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was sent to Germany, where my father was.
Damn.
I was a combat medic. My father was a combat medic. And I was about maybe 50 miles from where he was stationed in Germany. And I was in a little town called Hanau, which is south of Frankfurt. It was an artillery unit.
Okay.
So it's like 20 years later from World War II, I show up.
History repeats. They say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
It rhymes. And Germany was still recovering from the war.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like it was all built up.
But this is now for the Vietnam War?
This is during the Vietnam War. So I got drafted during the Vietnam War.
You're doing the medics in Germany that are...
In Germany.
Yeah.
I got lucky.
Yeah.
98% of my unit went to NAM.
Yeah.
Or the East, Far East. I got sent to Germany, thank God. Yeah. And but at the end of my term, it was at the time we had maybe 18 medics and one doc.
Okay.
When I was leaving, there was 5 medics and I was the doc.
Oh, okay.
Because they were all being sent to NAM.
What kind of you must have saw some crazy patients and things
Oh,
like that.
absolutely. I saw all kinds of stuff. Most of the stuff that I saw was because it's Germany, frostbite.
Yeah, amputations.
A lot of guys sleeping close to the vehicles that they shouldn't be because of the cold, and they got run over when we had to take off.
That's a thing.
Yeah.
In Iraq, that was a thing.
Yeah, so that was really bad. And then the other was obviously constipation. Believe it or not, because of the
MREs?
cold. Yeah.
Oh, was it because of the cold?
Because of cold. They didn't want
the MREs cause constipation too.
absolutely.
If you don't drink water, that's
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't drink water. I mean, it was all kinds of different things. And it was, you're a 20-year-old kid, you really grow fast, and you have to, adjust to the different climates. I come from San Francisco. There's no snow over there. It's just inundated in snow because we were up in the Golden Heights. I mean, what do you call not Golden Heights? I'm trying to think of it. Where all of them.
There's some mountains north of Frankfurt.
Okay.
It's just cold in the winter.
It's cold. It's up in Bavaria.
Germany.
In Bavaria, It was, where all the training, what Hitler used to do all his training.
Oh, that's
too.
Grafenwehr.
Grafenwehr, that's it.
Love
Yeah.
Grafenwehr.
Yeah, it was wild. so we did all of that, but but one of the things.
How did it feel to be repeating your father's footsteps?
Oh, it was crazy.
Did you feel like a sense of history in it?
Oh yeah, I felt, and another thing is that in basic training, I got to tell you a funny story.
Yeah,
you never volunteer in the Army. Yeah. My father told me
definitely
that.
not in boot camp.
Yeah. He said, don't volunteer for anything. And I had a couple of other cousins that were, Korean vets.
Yeah.
They said, don't volunteer. And one day, the sergeant comes in and says, anybody here, know how to play an instrument, And I said, well, because I played guitar. We had a little, rock and roll band when I was a kid. And I said, well, it can't be that bad, right? I said, yeah, I could do it. He said, well, great. Get over here, report over here. So I report, right? And what it is that he says, you're going to be playing the bass drum. Now, I'm 5'3". And they gave me this bass drum, right? I said, really? He says, yeah, because what we're going to do is when we're doing training and marching, you're going to hit the drum and it's going to be left, boom, right, boom, right, boom. Yeah. Boom. And that's when they did the steps, right?
Yeah, the cadence.
The cadence. And I said, okay, that's all right. I can do that. I mean, it was uncomfortable, this big old drum, right? But then they're having a football game at Fort Ord.
Yeah.
And they said, we're going to march in, because we're going to compete against the other companies to see who's the best marching unit. And we're going to, march in and you're going to be doing the drum and the other guy on the step, rushing that drum, right? Great. We went there. It was a night game, and we were on a hill. And then we're supposed to walk down the hill.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, you got it, brother. Yeah. So we're walking down the hill.
He's like, the drum is coming.
So we're sitting there. We're ready. Okay, ready? Right? March. Boom. Boom. And so we're walking down the hill. It's steep, right? It's wet. Yeah. It's it's October. And I slip, and I go forward. And guess who rides the drum down the hill? Me. Boom, 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 boom.
The cadence started picking up. He's like,
I'm rolling down the hill on top of the drum, and everybody's running. and the whole stadium's cracking up, and I land there, boom, on the ground with the drum at the top, and the sergeant yelling, "Rosales, what the hell's your problem, man?" And I'm sitting there, oh my God. I was all beat up. So never volunteer.
Never
volunteer.
Dude, that's a rule.
Yeah,
that's a rule.
Hey, one guy says, "You know shorthand?" He says, "Yeah, I know shorthand. We're shorthanded in the mess hall. Get your butt over there."
Well, they used to say in the Marines, they're like, "Who wants to go to a party?"
Oh yeah,
who wants to go to a party? And we're like, and they're like, "Yeah, a working party." And then a working party is like chow hall, KP duty.
You got it.
Go take out the trash. And in Iraq, it was really bad because Iraq is I don't know if I'll say it's a curse word, but it's burning the shitters.
Yeah.
You got like kerosene.
Did that in Vietnam.
You did that, yeah. So we still did it in Iraq.
Oh, absolutely.
So like it was like
burn pits.
Exactly. So like the burn pits would be like a party.
You got to be careful. It was nuts, but it was the biggest part of that was the fact that you became self-reliant. You learn how to work with other people, teammates, because basically, you got to cover each other. It didn't matter who you were, where you came from, or what it was. You had to cover each other because that's who you have to rely on. Loyalty, and then obviously patriotism, because now we're at war.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, I wasn't in Vietnam. It was during Vietnam.
I'm not in favor of the draft, but I think all volunteer force works better. But I do think it does a lot for Americans, especially Americans that have immigrant parents or immigrants themselves to serve, because it does something to you, to your character, does something to your civic nature. You just see the world a little different, especially if you serve overseas.
Yep.
Like we talked about this in the last segment about coming overseas and you come back to America. You learn to appreciate this country in ways that other folks don't, that never leave or never serve. Because it's different to go to like Mexico, to Cancun for vacation.
Sure.
To go to Mexico and serve in like a training op or a counter-narcotic op, or to go to war and things like that. So, I'm not saying that we need to have a draft or nothing like that. For sure not. I'm not really in favor of that policies, but I do think it does something. And especially I think for, my case, it was like, when you're from a kind of a low-income background, you don't have a whole lot of options, right? It's not like you're if you're a knucklehead like I was in high school, you don't get like scholarships thrown out your door. You're not a super athlete. So you got to figure out a way to take that step. And that sometimes the military is that step for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's a discipline that it teaches you, is it focuses your energy.
Yeah. Especially hyperactive kids and stuff like that. Yeah.
And the other thing too is that you learn how to interact with everybody.
That's a great point.
All nationalities, all levels of society. I mean, it was, we were all the same.
So in the Marine Corps, we say we're all green, right?
Yeah.
Dark green, like green Marine, but we're all green.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that's why, like, when we talk today, like in society now, there's this whole conversation about racism and things like that.
That's crazy.
And I was like, I served with people from all over the United States. Yeah. I might have encountered like one racist guy, maybe like in 8 years or something like that. Yeah. And he was like some guy, and he was like racist on a surface, really, because when it came down to actually having to do real, like when you break down, nature breaks down your character, right? Like if you're out in the woods or if you're out in the surf or anything like that, like I like, we we're in the Marines, so we do a lot of stuff on the beach, right? The water will break you. The sea will break you. Like you're only as tough and everything until you get hit with that first major wave. The salt will just dehydrate you.
Sure.
He could be as racist as he wants, but if we're swim buddies, he's swimming with me.
Oh yeah,
because his life depends on it. Yeah. And
in the barracks, it's a mix. It was everybody. There was no separation of people. No. It was everybody was in there, and we were all there to survive.
It's like a microcosm in some ways of the country. And so I was like, if we were that racist as a society, that would never work.
No, it won't work.
That would never work. We didn't have that. I didn't see that. We didn't have that. I feel like this racism conversation didn't happen until I got out of the military, because I got out in 2006, but then 2008 I got off contract. And that's when I started hearing about this stuff, like when I went to college and things like that.
Well, I got a chance to experience, the aftermath of Vietnam, and we had a lot of sensing sessions and all this kind of stuff. But in my platoon, I just said, we're all soldiers, and the rules apply equally. And if you're a screw up and you're not doing things right, then I don't care what color or whatever you want to describe as your differentiating characteristics. If you're messing up, you're going to pay the price. Or if you're doing wonderful things, you're going to be rewarded accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Sergio, tell us. So, you joined the military also young, right? Right. Were you what they call in the Marine Corps? We call it a Mustang. I think you guys call it like green to gold or something like that. Were you were officer the whole time?
No, I started. So I was like Manny. I came to the United States when I was 5. My dad was a bracero. He didn't speak English. Never went to school a day in his life. My mom didn't speak
He didn't
English.
get drafted into World War II, though, did he?
No, my old man. My
He was
dad,
avoiding the draft.
my dad was a bracero, and he got his green card in 1957. And then we got ours in 61. My dad had threatened to come back to Mexico, and his bosses liked him too much and said, just bring your family and we'll sponsor them. So
cool.
we did. And so in 61, we showed up in the United States.
Awesome.
And then I started out.
How old were you then?
I was 5.
Okay, so around the same age, actually. you guys,
I was almost 5.
So we were 5 boys. 3 of us were born in Mexico. 2 were born in the United States. When I was a little kid, my mom said, if you want to get your school clothes, go to work. So we started picking cotton. And she would take all of us, even my little brothers, and they would just sit on the cotton sack, and she pulled them. She babysat
Is
them.
this Arizona?
That was New Mexico.
New Mexico.
So I did 5 cotton picking seasons. The only job in my life that I hated.
How old were you?
When I started picking cotton, I was 8, 9.
Wow.
Thereabouts. And so I had 20 different jobs before I went to college, different things. We were talking about some of the people that you work with that kind of prepare you for the Army. I worked on a drilling rig in Grants, New Mexico, doing uranium exploration. And 2 of the guys that I work with out of the 4 were ex-cons, and they were both in for armed robbery. They were really nice guys, but they could be a little rough.
Made a mistake, yeah.
They could be a little rough. So you learn how to deal with those kinds of people. So when I went in the Army, it wasn't really that big a thing.
Yeah.
I started out in school in New Mexico in ROTC. My brother said, join ROTC because he was in it. It started out in the National Guard.
Your brother was in the Army too?
My brother started in the National Guard as an enlisted guy. And then he started in May, and then in December said, I want to be an officer. So he went into ROTC. Okay. And then a year and a half later, I show up. He does my curriculum for school and throws ROTC in. I said, I don't want to do it. I had hair down to here. He said, don't worry.
You didn't want to do it?
I didn't want to do it. I said, no, look, I like my hair. I don't want to. He said, you don't have to cut your hair. It's just a class. Just take it. And so this is the standards that we had back in those days.
Yeah.
I could wear my long hair with a uniform.
What?
And I would never let somebody do that.
Really?
Yeah.
Not my time.
I was at that time, it was a class.
Yeah.
But why would you let somebody put a uniform if you look like a rag bag as I did? It didn't matter. So the Army was going through a transition. Remember, the volunteer Army.
Maybe that's just the New Mexico National Guard.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
no, this is ROTC.
ROTC, sorry, yeah.
So
New Mexico State.
No, and again, it was just a class.
Okay, yeah.
But part of the lab included putting on a uniform.
Yeah.
And so you're under no obligation. And I wasn't really sure I wanted it.
So you're not contracted to go.
Not yet. So that comes. So then I transfer schools to the University of Iowa. I get there and they said, hey, if you want to stay in, you got to cut your hair. And so with a lot of tears, I cut my hair. And
have you ever let it grow back since?
No, because now
it won't grow back.
Now it doesn't want to cooperate.
Now it's another problem.
That's I have a different.
He said, you cut me a long time ago and I ain't coming back. It's like,
the hair, I learned to be without the hair.
all right.
So I started school in Iowa. I'm a junior. I'm now under contract. Yeah. I know that I'm going in. They tell me it's a 2-year commitment, but that year they said, no, it's 3. And I thought, well, okay, fine. I'll give it a shot.
They did 2-year contracts back then?
Back then for ROTC, yeah.
Okay.
Because I turned down the scholarships because I didn't want the 4-year commitment at first. Yeah. Then I started really liking it. And so I go to ROTC. My junior year, I'm not as good a cadet as I could be. And then that year they decided to allow everybody to compete for Airborne and Ranger School. And they decided the best way to do this is we keep sending cadets to Ranger School and they keep bombing out.
Oh, yeah?
And so let's just pick the top 3 PT scores out of the Corps cadets.
Were you a PT stud?
I was, number 2 out of the Corps.
Yeah. Good.
So I did okay. So that was a criteria. So I get both Airborne and Ranger School.
Oh, right on.
So I finish Airborne school, get thrown in the back of a truck, and then I go off to Ranger school. And I did both in the first try. No problems. I kept my mouth shut. I didn't volunteer for anything.
The drums. You don't play any instruments, by the way, do you?
No drums. And then, in Ranger school, what you want to do is keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
When they want you to yell and be a cheerleader, you're a cheerleader. When they want you to stop talking. And so I was kind of a low profile kind of guy. I was like at the very top of the bell-shaped curve. I was neither a hero nor a zero. I did all my stuff that I needed to do. I did it once and I got it done and I got my tab and I go back to ROTC at the University of Iowa. And there was only there were a very limited number of cadets that had both airborne and Ranger qualifications in the country. Because
Was jump school back then in Benning?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you go to jump school?
No.
Okay.
No
this is the worst course.
No.
Well, think about, so when you do jump school at Benning, jump school, you have this massive drop zone. Yeah. When you do it in Ranger school, they're like stamp size. Oh, wow. So you jump out of the plane immediately, you start looking for the open area because if you don't, you're going to land in trees. And I'm a little skinny guy. Yeah. And so I could kind of guide my chute, no problem. I always landed in the open area. Yeah. But I would look beneath me and I would see guys you would see these parachutes on the top, on top of trees and you're going like, geez.
No. I just remember the tower.
Oh, the towers are fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but they're fun, but then they're like, I always equate it to like going to Disney World and you got to wait like 5 hours to go on the ride. But instead of waiting in a line, they're like, you're waiting while you're doing push-ups.
Yeah, doing something that you breathe wrong and then you're doing push-ups.
But I got to tell you, we're talking about the hair.
Yeah.
It reminded me my first day, they took me from bus from Oakland to Fort Ord. They got you off the bus and then you have to turn everything in, right?
Yeah.
Your clothes, you ship it back home. That's why it's called GI, government issue. They give you all the crap that doesn't fit, the shoes, nothing, right? And then they gave you $10. Yeah. It's the first $10 you got. $5 was to buy, the toothpaste, shaving, all that. And the other $5 was to get a haircut.
Yeah.
You got to pay for your haircut, right? So I'm in line and there's this guy in front of me, like Sergio, with the long hair and big old sideburns. And he's crying and he's going, oh, because he's seeing as they're shaving everybody's
and
head
they don't like take care. They just
right, and it's got a vacuum cleaner attached to it. Feel like they're sucking the hair out of your head.
They're sucking it all up, right? So the guy's crying. He's going, oh man, it took me all this time, And so he gets to the barber and he sits down and he's crying. And the barber says, what's the matter, man? He says, oh man, you're gonna rip off my sideburns and all that stuff. He says, oh, says, you can keep your sideburns. He says, really? He says, yeah. So he's cutting his hair, and then he gets to his sideburns. He goes, and he slides I lied. And he gets the hair, and he says, here's your sideburns. You can keep it. So he gives him the hair. The whole place is cracking up, man. I said, oh, dude, what is this guy going to do?
What did he say? What did the dude say?
Oh, he was cracking up.
He was laughing.
Well, first he was happy as hell. He's keeping his sideburns. Yeah, right. Then he cracks up because you knew he was dumb.
You got him.
Yeah,
the hair thing.
That's the Army,
No, but the haircut, when you finish Ranger school, the very last thing you do is they cycle you one more time to get as much hair as they can out of your head.
Okay, so we're talking about hair. So you could tell, like, us Bolivians, you don't see a bald indigenous Bolivian. I'll tell you that. You don't find them too often. And so here's it, like,
but you see it in Mexicans though.
Yeah, well, it's different. We're Inca blood. So no, but what was interesting was, one, I had a problem because this is I always drive me nuts in the Marines because, Black Marines, right? Their hair grows out, but you can't really see it, right? So they don't get crap for it, right?
Right.
Blonde Marines, their hair's so light, you don't really see it either. Latino Marines, we have dark hair and lighter skin. You could we just get a little peck and you could see it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're always giving you crap. Your hair's not cut. Your hair's not cut.
Right.
And so anyhow, and I'm sitting there, and then I did for boot camp. I did what I had to do. We shaved, and then we grew, and we did a thing, right? For grunt school, for infantry school, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna finagle my way to not I'm gonna do a low fade, And everyone does a mid reg or they do a high fade, high and tight, what we call in the Marine Corps. Which that's the worst haircut in the world. It's like a patch, it's like an island on the top of your head. The drill instructors all had that.
Oh no!
And I was like, I'm gonna do a low fade, which is unheard of, like a low. And I slipped the barber like an extra 10.
Oh no!
And they did me
corruption. See,
I was like,
you started the corruption a long time ago, right?
And I get it, and then and I was one of the last people to get cut, to get out of the platoon, and they cut my hair, and just does the thing. And then I come out, and then the platoon sergeant's looking. And he's like, "Okay," he's like looking at me. He's like, "What happened here?" And I was like, "Oh, sir, the clippers ran out of battery, sir." And I was like, and so he got me out, and I was like, "This guy's meant for intel because he's different, right? He's not just a regular."
Man, he had the line down too.
Yeah. And I had it all planned out. I was like, "I'm keeping my hair." I was like, "I'm keeping my hair," but I had to get it cut later anyway. Because honestly, the reason you get it cut short, to be honest with you, when you go to the field,
they don't want to grab your hair and
Well, there's that, but there's also like
stuff that lives in it.
It's exactly.
Yeah,
It's
lice.
anti-hygienic to have long hair
Right.
and be out in the field for an extended period of time because you don't take we would be out in the field for like 20 days and you're not taking showers or anything.
Yep.
Yeah, if you have long hair, you're coming back with some stuff.
Yeah, big time.
Once I got into the Army, the hair was not an issue. It was just kind of like it stays short. That's all
short.
there is to
Yeah,
it. And once you've been through Ranger School, you've been conditioned to this is just the way it is. And they teach you so many things, especially they indoctrinate you into what it is to be a leader.
Yeah, well, Rangers specifically, right? Because that's like leadership's a core.
And it served me super well. I thought about being a clinical psychologist when I went into the Army, and I was going to defer my commission and be a shrink. And then I realized I worked. I had like 6 weeks before I went into the Army, and I went to get a practicum at a rehabilitation center. And that's when I realized I'm not cut out to be a clinical psychologist. I just don't have the wherewithal, the patience, or whatever it is. Anyway, I get into the Army and I realize, hey, I can just tell people what to do.
Yeah.
Or I get told what to do.
And
it was just a whole different thing. And I liked the camaraderie. I liked the field. You were really kind of a white collar worker doing blue collar stuff.
Why did you choose the Army as opposed to the other branches?
My brother's the one that picked
Oh,
it for me.
your brother. Yeah.
I didn't have a choice.
I know why you went to
no
the Army.
choice. Only the Army drafts.
I was going to say that. Yeah, because Marine doesn't draft, right?
No, my
it's
brother,
only the Army.
my brother got drafted.
Okay.
And so he shows up, he goes through the whole thing, and then he basically decides he gets drafted, and they said, but we're not gonna call you up. So then he got into the National Guard because he still wanted to go into the Army. Okay. And once he got into the Army, he wanted to share that with me. And at first I thought this is crazy, and then once I got into it, I said, this is fun. And I stayed in for 30 years, so it was a lot of fun.
30 years. It was no fun for me, man.
How long did you stay in?
2, I got the hell out.
Like come out?
Yeah, they offered me $10,000 to re-up.
Yeah.
And I said, if I re-up, I'm going to Vietnam.
I
I said, no, thank you.
This is already, this is like my father's. I got to play my lottery ticket, right?
I think I'm lucky. Yes.
I was going to ask you, when did you first go overseas?
So I went straight overseas. I joined the Army in 1978. I did my officer basic training, started in July, and then Thanksgiving weekend, I'm in Frankfurt, Germany on my way to Mainz.
Okay.
Wow.
And we were yeah, I know. Yeah, we're in the 8th. I was in the 8th Infantry Division. I think Hannah was under the
640
first,
battery.
That was the third.
Third Armored Division. Yeah.
So we're partner divisions. We're in the same corps. We're in 5th Corps.
5th Corps.
So I show up in Germany and
hung out at the Fulda Gap, right?
Yeah, the Fulda Gap. I had my general defense positions were in the Fulda Gap.
Okay, right on.
So one of the things that you learn is, you learn about Ivan, and you learn about communists and all this kind of stuff. And I'd kind of been studying that when I was interested in that since high school. So now here you are in Germany in the middle of the Cold War when we had a gazillion troops in Germany. I think at the time we had something like 270,000 Well, it was armed services personnel in Germany, and so it was massive. And when you went to the field, you didn't do any simulations. You went to the field with all your stuff.
Oh, is that right?
Everything,
everything.
And you would do these field exercises in the middle of villages. You'd drive through town. You had your vehicles parked in everybody's little stretch of wood. We would typically do the exercises about this time of the year when the harvest has already been finished. And then it'd start raining, and then you'd get stuck in the mud, and it would rain and rain and rain like it is right now.
Yeah, worse.
And it was a miserable existence in the field, but it was fun when you came out, and you learned a lot in the process. Yeah. So it was a completely
survive.
And that's the thing. I think the what do you call it? Self-sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely.
To learn how to just be on your own and figure it. Especially in like, so when you go in the Marine Corps and the infantry is a little different, but. Then I went to like supply MOS, like to do like warehousing and stuff like that. But then you move into Intel, and then that's a little different because you're a lot more independent, right. Even more than like Rangers or medics and stuff, because you really are kind of an augmentee to different bigger units, and you're supporting the division and stuff like that. And then I think even more so when you go to war. When you go to war, I mean, because when we went, so like a little bit of our story, my story, first. This is an interesting point to tell on the podcast and I've said this in presentations and stuff, but so I went to Iraq in 2003 in the invasion, right? That's right. And when we go to Kuwait first because we didn't know when we're going to cross the border. We're going to cross what they call the FIBA, right? The forward edge battle area. But we knew it was coming. And this is like late February, we're waiting in March. And this is actually something I just talked about recently with another veteran on another pod. The U.S. military hadn't been at war, like serious war for a lot since Vietnam, pretty much, right? We had the Balkans, we had some stuff there, we had Kosovo, we also had the Desert Storm and stuff like that, but that wasn't war in the sense that like prolonged, sustained warfare against, in a foreign area. But we knew we were about to get into it, right? And Afghanistan was kicking up, but that was more special ops, and that was like a limited engagement. This was going to be like divisions, brigades were coming into Iraq, and we're preparing for that. And I mean, this is not something I want to say, but like it's true. I mean, there were certain Marines that were scared. I remember this.
We were always
scared.
Yeah.
Well, we're all scared, but I'll be honest with you. A lot of the Marines that were close to me, we wanted to go. We wanted to go because we were tired of training. We were training always training, they're training us to fight.
Yep.
So we need to fight. And I mean, a fighter fights.
Right.
So we wanted to go, and my background, I'm not going to get too much into that, but we're all scared, but I'm scared at the same time excited. I want to do this. That changes once the bullets start coming. It's a little more scared than excited.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then although there are some guys that are different,
some guys like that stuff.
I was like, you're a little nuts. I was like, I don't know about you.
Nuts,
Glad you're here because I don't want you in the streets.
Yeah, those are the guys that get the medals.
Yeah, sometimes, or they get something else. Sometimes.
Yeah, right.
But there were other guys, and they were like hot shots in training, like super studs on the rifle range and PT. Yeah. But when it came down to doing the real deal, they weren't ready.
They were wimps.
I remember they were wimps. And even in the Marine Corps, there was a dude I remember, a staff sergeant, hot shot and everything. He found a way not to go. He was already in Kuwait. We're already like on the border. He found a way not to cross because he made a whole reason. He said his gas mask inserts didn't arrive yet.
Oh.
Because we're in Iraq, we're worried about the gas chemical. So your gas mask insert. He's like, yeah. And apparently there's a condition that he found a way not to go.
Oh wow!
I was like, dude, that's some bitch maneuver right there.
Well, I tell you, the GIs they can come up with ways to do things.
Yeah. Well, my brother was in Desert Storm, so I was stuck at Leavenworth at the time, and he goes off to war. And I asked him, I said, after the whole thing was over, and I said, so what was it like? And he said, well, you've been to the National Training Center? I said, yeah, I mean, I've been there. And he said, well, going through Desert Storm was about 10% of going through the National Training Center.
Okay.
Now that was his experience.
Yeah.
And we just rolled over everybody. And
Desert Storm was one of those, I think, to me, maybe one of the last conventional military war operation that really was super efficient. Like we rolled over the Iraqis. It wasn't even more than I say, the invasion in Iraq. But anyway, the point I was going to make with that is to say, this was interesting because, and I say this stat, and Sergio knows this, and you might know this too, Manny, but so what the job I did initially when I went to Iraq, so you guys have heard of search and recovery, right?
Right.
SNR, right? I did, search and rescue, SNR, right? I did search and recovery.
Recovery comes after you figure out that there's nothing to rescue.
So you're recovering the remains of soldiers and Marines that were KIA killed in combat.
Terrible.
So that was what I had to do. But I got to see a lot of the fatality statistics and stuff. Right. This is first one point. The first combat casualty of the U.S. Armed Forces in Iraq was a Guatemalan immigrant.
Wow.
And I remember we saw this, and it was minutes within that. So there was another guy that got hit with a sniper, and then there was another was a helicopter crash. But the first one technically that went to the processing center and got his personal effects, gets shipped out to Dover, Delaware, was a Guatemalan immigrant. And there was a lot of confusion at first, the time and everything like that when it got back to the Pentagon. But eventually they got the story right, and I think Univision actually did a whole piece on it and stuff like that. But I remember this guy. That came to the processing center. The second point of it was when you look at the statistics in terms of nationalities, the third nationality with the highest level of casualties in the Iraq War in the first year of the war, second to only the United States and Britain, UK, was Mexicans.
Wow.
It's boggling everybody because there's no Mexicans weren't part of the coalition that went into Iraq. Was because what you were saying before,
they were green card holders.
There were so many U.S. residents, Mexican nationals serving, especially in the Marine Corps.
And that's a rite of passage. So going to the Marines when there's a war is sort of a thing.
Yeah, and it's Camp Pendleton, California, right? That's where the first Marine Expeditionary Force is the one that I was in. Like East Coast Marines, like I was the second MEV from North Carolina that went, but that was a small detachment compared to First MEV. First MEV took the lead in the war. We went to Pendleton before we shipped off to Kuwait, and so like the Mexicans, they were a big part of this war, even if they weren't officially part of the war. And I think that speaks a lot. I remember seeing Texan flags in Iraq, like in some of the Humvees and stuff. I remember seeing Mexican flags in Iraq. It's like, oh, I know Mexico's going to conquer here, but I guess they will. Mexico's going to plant a flag everywhere. But
I think this is a beauty. This gets to the heart of who we are because, again, you were saying earlier how important it is to be in an organization that incorporates everybody. And that was the beauty of it because when the bullets start flying, everybody's an American.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this is one of the places, the military, is where you really get a feel for being an American. You understand what that flag means. You understand what you're fighting for. You understand what the Constitution is because you raise your right hand.
I mean, it's the only thing you're looking for.
The
only thing you're looking for when you're looking at, because from a distance, uniform's kind of blurry, right? You're looking for that patch,
Right.
You're looking for that patch. It's like, oh, it's an American. Okay,
it's
we're good.
It's an American patch. You're looking for the flag.
You're looking for the flag.
You're the flagpole.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's. I was in Estonia recently. I was giving a keynote address about freedom. The conference was called Defending Freedom. A lot of it was about Russia and things like that. And what I said was, we're all here. Like I think whether you're conservative or you're a classical liberal, libertarian, or maybe a Christian Democrat, right? You all believe in individual liberty. I think that unites all of us, right? Yep. But there's another concept I think that isn't clearly discussed as much among even conservative circles, which is national sovereignty, which is a big part of that. And I said when you go to war, when you're in combat, it's not your individual liberty that you're thinking about. It's that national sovereignty, which is based on your patriotism for your people and your country. And you're looking like you could be a stranger you just met yesterday, but you're now in the fight and you're like, I'm going to depend on you. You're going to depend on me.
Yep. Right.
And it brings you closer together than almost anything in the world.
Absolutely.
It brings you closer together. And I think that's what makes us, and like America's this unique experience because, we're blessed by geography for sure. We have great real estate in the world, 2 oceans, Canadians in the north, and Mexicans in the south. But I think more than anything, we have this ability to just unite under that sense of being an American with the flag. Because we're very diverse in terms of like West Coast, East Coast, South. I mean, even each state is very different. It's almost like a country in itself. But most countries don't have that. Even in China and Russia, they're not as united internally as they are.
And they don't have as many friends either.
No.
And so my next to the last assignment was with the UN. I provided UN military observers. So those are my guys. And one of the things that people look for was that American flag because we wear the flag like a flagpole. We wear it on the right shoulder in the Army, and it's a backward flag. People say, why do you have a backward flag? And they said it's not because the field of stars has to be in the leading edge. And so every time that I went to places, they were always looking for that American flag, and they always wanted that American support. And there were some cases where we had some guys in a pickle, and I would always coordinate with whatever combatant command was in that region, even though we were working with the UN, which kind of put us outside of the normal realm of things. But I was never denied any assistance from any of the combatant commanders. And every time, the first place that I visited was at combatant command headquarters. And I was in a position to pull out my guys, and I was going to fill the C-130 out of a place. So they would come in and get us out if we needed to. We didn't end up executing that particular option, but they were always ready to go. And people always looked to the United States for leadership, even though at the time, I think at my peak, I had like 36 military observers scattered throughout 5 active missions at any given time. I shut 2 down, I stood 2 up, and I got to go to garden places like Liberia right after the Civil War, Haiti right after the pickle.
Liberia is a place, huh?
Liberia, Haiti, Eritrea, Ethiopia.
Was Charles? No, that was before Charles.
Yeah,
Taylor,
no,
right?
that was Charles Taylor was the reason we were there.
So I was there when he was leaving.
He was a messy guy.
Yeah,
Totally messy guy.
He left in a messy way.
He left. Yeah, that guy was a piece.
That was the first. There was a NEO, a non-combatant evacuation operation.
Yep.
Of the messy. Were you gonna say, Manny?
No, I was going to say about Taylor.
Oh yeah.
I'm in Nigeria.
Okay.
Because we were going to open up small business development centers. We had Commerce Department in the SBA, working with the with Nigeria. So they sent me to Abuja, and I'm sitting there with in a Sunday morning. We did all of the work a couple of days before, and then the president was Abasanjo.
Okay.
He invites me to mass because he's a Casualty preacher, so he does his mass in this private chapel and the presidential residence, and then afterwards he invites us to breakfast, and he had all of the people sitting around in the breakfast, and he's talking, and I'm there with the ambassador and everything, and then all of a sudden one of his military aides comes over and whispers in his ear, and he says, "Excuse me, I have to come back. Back in a minute," and then he goes back behind some curtains, and he's talking to the guy, and he comes in. I asked the ambassador, I said, "Who's this guy?" He says, "Oh, that's his top military advisor." And then he comes back out and he sits down and he says, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to pick this up because Taylor is now asking for asylum in Nigeria." So he was coming in. He was accepted from all the mess that he had created.
I think he did get asylum from Nigeria.
He got asylum from Nigeria. So I was right there.
Oh, were you really?
Right there when the guy came in. They said he was, and he was asking
This
for
is like,
asylum.
how you guys like cross paths in the same place?
Yeah.
So me and you did too.
Yeah, it's amazing. So when you were mentioning that, I said, "Oh my God, I got to."
I was doing that. So to tie in the Marines, both in Haiti and in Liberia, I got there when the Marines were leaving.
Okay.
And in the case of Liberia, the African Union was coming in. Yeah. In the case of Haiti, the Marines, I got there when the Marines were still there, and then did some coordination. And then we created the Multinational Interim Force Haiti, which replaced the Marines. And then we created MINUSTA that replaced the Multinational Interim Force Haiti. So I was part of that whole process.
Yeah, okay.
And so what you get a chance to see is what failed states look like.
Yeah.
In both Liberia and in Haiti, you got to see different geographical settings, but the problems are still a lot the same. In the case of Liberia, we probably had one of the most successful disarmament missions that you've had with a peacekeeping mission. At some point, we had something like 15,000 forces in Liberia to put the country back on track.
Yeah.
And so you've seen some success stories, and it was interesting to see how everything came together and how the different missions operated, because not all of them had the same level of efficiency.
For sure.
But we got a chance to see some good out of that. And you also get a really good opportunity to understand human nature, because I had missions in Georgia.
Yeah.
All the stuff that's going on.
Like Georgia, the Caucasus.
The Caucasus.
Yeah.
I've been in South Ossetia. Yeah. I've been in Najara. I've been in Abkhazia. Some of the.
It's a hot zone now.
It's a little messy. Yes.
Crazy.
And
so, I mean, what Putin, like, when I came back from Europe, and so everyone's talking about what's his next move, right? Because obviously in Ukraine it's not going well for him.
No.
So they're looking at what he's going to do, because apparently he's not stopping, because going forward. So one option is where I was at, the Baltics and the Nordic countries. Yeah, they're vulnerable. They're not part of NATO and things like that. So they're looking at, you might look at, doing some shenanigans out there. Probably not military-esque like he did in Ukraine, but he's got cyber options. He's got subversion, all those other options. But the other area that everyone's talking about, he might go back to 2008. He might do, South Ossetia. He might do Georgia. He might do that area again. Right. Although I think that his option, far be it for me to think like Vladimir Putin, but I'm thinking that his options are probably better in North than they are in the Caucasus or Central Asia, just because he's going to run into more clashes with Turkey and even into some levels with Iran and things like, because there's different competing interests.
I think right now he's got his hands full with Ukraine.
Yeah, no, but that's the reason why, because he's looking to something that's going to deflect.
But I don't know how he could deflect by.
But not militarily. Like if he does like a cyber offensive on, like you remember the cyber attack on Estonia in 2007, that like was majorly crippling for Estonia. Estonia has built I was briefed when I was there, like a tremendous cyber capability now, but they've noticed an intensity on cyber attacks that were happening in August on them from Russia, and then when they did the conscription, when Vladimir Putin announced the partial mobilization, the only country that I want to say, because I think Turkey remained open, but one of the few European Union countries that remained open was Finland.
Yeah.
And so, they're looking at a mass migration push onto that border and seeing like that. So my guess is I agree with you, like bandwidth militarily, I don't think he has much more. I mean, that's why they're looking at getting, I think artillery from North Korea, drones from Iran. I mean, he's going to the bottom of the barrel, scrapping.
Yeah, he's having a difficult
for
time.
stuff.
And mobilizing another 300,000.
And that all went wrong. That went crazy. Like they like drafted the wrong people and they're like apologizing and stuff.
They're all trying to get out.
Yeah.
About border.
Yeah, exactly. And so my thinking is he's going to have to resort to what Russia's actually good at, which is non-kinetic stuff, But he has to create a threat that's going to have the Europeans and the world, Americans to start looking at another flank because because that's the problem. The Ukraine government has a lot of external support from the Europeans, from NATO, from the United States, from Turkey, from other places.
Well, I think what's going to be telling though is yes to all of that, but when you shut off the ability of Germany to get gas,
the Nord Stream.
and winter is coming,
It's going to be terrible over there.
the typical European citizen is not going to be happy with turning the thermostat way down.
Yeah.
And if there's not an influx of gas coming from the United States and we're not producing much more, and then the Chinese are using some of the gas we sent to China and they're reselling it over into Europe, the whole dynamic of the energy issue is going to play out this winter. So we're going to see how that changes again. But this gets back to the nature of the military. I started out as a second lieutenant in the Fulda Gap. We were stationed in mines. We would go up to our border positions when we did exercises. And you're a lieutenant looking at a very small piece of turf. And then as you spend more time in the military, you start getting a much broader view of the world as it is. And you figure out that you're part of that paradigm where you're talking about diplomacy, information, the military, and economics. And you're that big hammer in the toolkit of American power, and you start to understand how it all fits together.
Yeah.
This is the beauty of being in the military, that you start from a kid that came to this country not speaking a word of English, who flunked the first grade because he couldn't see. And then in one generation, I get a chance to see and do all of these things. What I described with the peacekeeping was just one aspect, but, working in the Trump administration 4 years, looking at defense policy for this hemisphere.
Both you guys.
It's really fun.
You did it in the Pentagon at the Trump administration. You served for 4 years as a political appointee, as a defense official, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for all Western Hemisphere affairs. And you served in the Bush administration, Small Business Administration. 7 years in the Bush administration. And so we didn't even talk that much about the work that you've done for small businesses and Latinos and things. But that's for people that, don't know Manny. Manny is one of the go-to figures here in Washington, D.C. for folks that want to get minority-owned businesses up and running. I mean, he did it since the Bush era. And we all had to survive the Obama years,
Obama years.
But we all went through that. And then during the Trump years, were you in the government at all? Or no?
I was a senior consultant in energy for 2 years. And you're absolutely correct. Energy is where it's at.
Yeah.
And that's a big, going back to the Fulda Gap, because, we did a lot of our maneuvers with NATO. We used to have these, big time alerts and maneuvers that we would.
Oh yeah,
get a little close to the mic so we don't.
Because we were expecting that the Russians were going to come across the Fulda Gap.
Yep.
Okay. And we basically were just a deterrent for about 30 seconds before they flew by us. Right.
We were a road bump.
We were a road bump, right? So we would always be doing exercises and maneuvers around the gap, and then I can see the Russians and the East Germans, and Czechs and all that, doing their maneuvers. Because we would be up a little higher and we can see them in the gap, And the scariest thing that I ever had in the military, because I didn't get close to a war. I mean, there was wars going on all around us, but is one night, we were, basically almost on the border, right? We were looking over and we wandered off. Me and a couple of other guys, we kind of wandered off in the woods. We were, going out there to have a couple of beers and all that. And then we wandered too far. Okay. And I think we crossed over a little bit. And we could hear Russian troops. And I'm saying, oh my God, I didn't have my weapon on me. Well, I was a medic. I had a 45. Good luck, pal. So, it was really, we basically hid in the bushes, and we saw them walk. The troops walk by, and
We crossed the border without knowing it.
without knowing it.
Yeah.
We just kind of we wound. I mean, it wasn't too far. I mean, it was right there. I said,
How many
wow.
drinks did you guys have?
Too many. So that's the last time I did that one. But you were right. I mean, that was constant maneuvering, and you learned, the perspective of the larger picture.
But even back then, you learn certain things that you're talking about your gut. You get certain senses of things. I went into East Germany for the first time in 1980. In those days, you could go in, but you had to go in full uniform, and you had to follow a certain set of protocols. And I remember one of the things that amazed me as soon as I crossed from West Germany to East Germany is the wheat went from being like this to being like that, about half. You go from a meter down to about half a meter, and it was full of weeds. And then you get into the Autobahn, and it's messy. It's got little cracks all over the place. The infrastructure is horrible. And then you get to meet Ivan when you go into West Berlin, because you go from East Germany then into West Berlin. And the soldiers that they had there were Russian, not Germans. They would put Russians at the border checks. And Ivan was not 10 foot tall and bulletproof. That's when I realized, I don't think about this Ivan guy. And then I went into Checkpoint Charlie, went into East Berlin. And then I confirmed, these guys are a soup sandwich. I mean, the whole, all of East Berlin was drab, dreary, gray. Yeah. You went to the restaurants, the heat wasn't quite there. You go into West Berlin, and it's a happening place. And so I kept thinking, I don't know about this business about Ivan. He can put up a good story. They're great at Potemkin villages, but when it comes to actually doing stuff, they're not that good. By the way, when we were at the Fulda Gap, guess who we were confronting at the Fulda Gap? It was the 8th Combined Arms Army, who is now in southeastern Ukraine.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
same unit?
8th Combined Arms Army.
Same ones.
Wow.
Yeah.
Same guys.
I'm fighting those guys for a while now.
Yeah, absolutely. It hasn't stopped.
And
But talking about my role at the SBA, in reference to the world theater, is a lot of what we did internationally. Obviously, the first role was to get U.S. small businesses to basically export.
Yeah.
Provide all the programs, the funding, the access to capital and the markets to be able to export, to increase our, export capability. But the other one was also a lot to do with diplomacy, because a lot of the things that we did was transfer technology.
Yeah.
So helping, for instance, in Iraq, we were basically took in groups from Iraq that were coming here to learn how to set up small business development centers. How to...
Was it like Iraqi refugees?
No, Iraqi government business officials, so they can create something similar, so they can get their businesses up and running.
Oh, right on.
And we did the same thing in Nigeria. We did the same thing in Egypt.
Wow.
In Latin America, Costa Rica was one of our
the
first.
big ones?
And Mexico, where we set up the first... we call the small business development centers. Now Mexico has about 250 of them.
Wow.
All over Mexico that help small businesses grow. So a lot of our role was basically diplomatic, in foreign affairs, because being part of the international function of the U.S. government, the State Department would use us to do certain things. USAID.
Yeah, you guys are part of that foreign service.
Power.
Yeah.
Part of the
They
foreign
would
service.
use us, to give us grants to go over and set up certain things. Same thing with the Commerce Department was part of it also. So there's a lot of diplomacy involved in that, and a lot of work in recovery in areas like Iraq. Reconstruction. So we would actually send some guys over from our agency to help them reconstruct. And with the same thing with the GOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act, they help to get Africans, export.
That's something about the Bush administration I don't think was really well known or told, was the successes in Africa.
Oh, Africa was a big success.
That was probably the most successful
they were very
effort
successful.
that the Bush administration did.
And they had in Latin America too, mostly Central America, when they had the Millennium Challenge account.
Oh, Millennium Challenge,
Basically, what they said is, you want the money coming from us, you're going to have to then do it, by project, and we're going to fund the project as you go along, versus giving them the money and then they never do the project.
It started with like the Merida Initiative.
Yes.
I remember that, yeah.
And then
that was a security more, right?
It was both.
Was it? Yeah.
And so then they went from that to also working CAFTA, which was
CAFTA, yeah.
Sure.
And that was in Central America, and then the Millennium Account came later.
Yes.
But all of these things require that interagency cooperation, coordination that all of us get involved in when you're working overseas. The embassy is the coordinator.
Yep.
But everybody's got to come in from different agencies to be able to be part of that. So the department, I mean, I represented the Defense Department when I was in the Army, when I was doing overseas work. And then Manny was doing
business.
He was doing the economic piece, which came out of commerce.
Well, even Homeland Security has an international economics international affairs division and stuff like that. So it's economics and security and defense. It all really blends together.
Absolutely. So. And then with Mexico, after NAFTA, we did the Partnership for Prosperity.
Yeah,
which was basically to build it up, and obviously again
security and prosperity partnership, security and prosperity
partnership. That was also the border issue at that time too.
And what's interesting about that is that people say security and prosperity. The security piece was about 20% of the funding. The prosperity piece is about 80% of the funding because this hemisphere doesn't have a lot of the conflicts that you have on the other side of the world.
Well, even in Plan Colombia, a big part of that was economic incentives, economic development. It wasn't just supporting the military. That was obviously another piece.
Yeah, one of the first things that I did when I joined the administration was go to Chile.
Oh, is that right?
When we actually signed the free trade agreement.
I remember that.
Chile,
yeah.
Which was awesome because obviously it had been passed by George I, right?
Yeah.
And then Clinton at the end finally approved it, and then we signed it with
ratified
George.
it.
Ratified it with George W.
Yeah, Chile's having some problems now.
Oh, it's big problems. But it was but those trade agreements are
those are important.
I
think the Bush had the free trade area of the Americas, and I think had it not been for 9/11, you can argue that it's debatable, but you can argue that the Bush administration would have focused a lot more on Latin America.
Well, his first meeting was with the Mexican president.
Correct.
Right? I mean, he went right away. Because he's from a border town.
Well, not only that, but President Bush and President Fox were both governors.
Yeah.
And they had a partnership established even before.
He's from Texas,
that.
right?
Yeah, he's from Texas. Absolutely.
That was right.
Yeah, and that's one of the things back to the migration.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've always said is part of the problem is the U.S. takes its eye off the ball in Latin America. Because what's happening is that a lot of that migration is generated by lack of economic opportunity, lack of jobs, lousy wages, and then on top of that you got corruption.
It's just getting worse.
It's getting worse
because all these countries are going authoritarian socialist,
exactly. So if you can just send the efforts like we did with Mexico with NAFTA, because now
we need leadership here though.
Well, there's an ideology that goes with all of this. For example, when Manny and I were doing the Cold War, you knew that you had Ivan the Terrible with all of his weapons across the border. And then he found out that the wall collapsed, everything went south. And then he decided, well, let me see what I can do to influence in other ways. Because during the Cold War also, we had the guerrilla movements throughout the hemisphere. We fought against that. I was part of the training that went into that. And then later they figured out, okay, well, we can't win in a conventional war. We can't win in guerrilla wars. Let's start influencing the way that elections are conducted. And you saw what happened in Venezuela. I was there when Chavez got elected. I was the army attaché. And then I further went down to Chile, and Chile was the example of how things can turn around completely. And now Chile's taking a walk on the wild side and see if the government is able to.
We did have good news recently with the referendum.
That's right.
The people
they say stuck with that, right?
They said, look, we were mad, but we're not that mad.
Well, I think what happened is that people took a step back and goes, okay, so how's this guy going to govern? And it's one thing to say things; it's another thing to actually get things done.
Well, I think honestly, it was they overshot their hand. If you read that document, I mean, they threw too much into that. It was beyond throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It was literally like taking Chile and fracturing it into like several different countries.
Well, the draft constitution was horrible. And
that's why I say, had they been a little bit if they didn't go so far,
they would have got it.
They would have got some of those things. So even some of the more socialist things or some of the woke policies.
Same things happen in Peru.
But that guy can't even get the draft done.
He can't get the draft done.
He's working on it.
Yeah. But anyways, we gotta check out. I want to first of all, do you guys have anything you want to plug? Any organization? Are you still with the Latino Coalition? Or?
No, I want to plug something that we just released last week, and we invited you, but you weren't able to come. But there's a group here called Job Creators Network. Basically, it's a small business, mostly focused small business, but it's all business. Okay. And what it did, it was say they came out with an initiative called the Prosperity Plan for Small Business.
Oh wow!
Which is similar to what Gingrich did with the Plan for America.
Okay.
Which is basically, if you guys want to have support from the small business sector, we're talking about people running for office. Yeah. or people in office is that you're going to have to follow these, you're going to have to address these issues. And those issues.
Where can they find out about that?
Well, JCN, their website, jcn.org.
.org.
Yeah, which is the Job Creators Network. And
Send it to me, and we'll put it in the link in the description.
And so that thing is, basically something that they're pushing out there because small businesses
That's important.
always being neglected.
Is that national or just here?
No, it's national.
Okay.
No, it's a national referendum, but for all people who are interested in being in public service, that they got to address those issues. And the other thing is that small businesses, the economic engine.
Yeah.
Okay, they employ 80% of everybody. Sure. I mean, they're 90% or more of the exporters. So a lot of people don't understand that, with this pandemic and with these regulations and all of these burdensome, crackdowns, it's affecting the economy. It's because the small businesses aren't hiring. The small businesses, are the ones that are taking it in the shorts when it comes to taxes and regulations. So that's super important. That's why obviously our inflation is high, and a lot of the problems that we're having economically is because the small business sector is being really
awesome
affected.
Awesome, cool. So we'll put the link so people can learn more about it in the description. And obviously, thank you, Manny, for all that you're doing. You're always been leading. I always say this, like, we're Latinos for sure, but we're Americans at the end of the day. Like, I hate that hype. I'm not believing American.
Well,
I'm American.
You know what I used to say? I was born in Nicaragua, but made in America.
There you go. And drafted in America.
So it was my own man.
And so, anything you want to plug? Anything you want to promote?
Yeah. I mean, I lived in a blessed country. I was blessed to come here. It was by the grace of God that we came. The coincidence that had to happen for us to be here are beyond the pale. And this is the country that makes it happen. Yeah. No other country in the world has provided the level of prosperity for as many people as the United States. And this is where it was created. This is what we have to defend. This is what we need to continue to strengthen, because when a guy like me can come from another country, not speaking a word of English, from parents that were not afforded the opportunity to be educated, and in one generation, I end up being a taxpayer and having some pretty interesting things happen to me along the way. With 30 years in the Army and the 4 years of the Trump administration, there's no other country in the world that even gets close.
To be able to do something like that. Yeah.
And the American dream is something that we have to defend. It's something that we have to protect, because you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And some people are trying to do that now. We need to remember that this is the country that gave Manny and I the opportunities, gave you the opportunities. We've lived the American dream.
Yeah, every day.
And the uniqueness of us is that we're not unique.
Yeah.
We are
part of the fabric.
We are a representation of the American dream, but I would argue
that the uniqueness of us is we have the opportunity to tell the story. Some people don't, because they're too busy working and doing their thing, and they don't have a platform or whatever. But all of us have this ability to tell the story. You guys have served in high levels, and we're able to tell that story. I'm serving in the civil society world. But I think that, no, absolutely, Sergio, what you're saying is so key. And I think we'll probably end on that message, because, it is Hispanic Heritage Month.
Yes,
but it's not just about this month. It's about basically the contribution that Hispanics do. But it's not just Hispanics. It's just it's more, I feel like it's what America does that allows Hispanics to do what we would do in their, like, if Bolivia, where my parents are from, was different, had gone a different direction, then I would be doing, great things in Bolivia. Yeah, and that would have been my future, or Nicaragua or Mexico.
Right.
But we're having challenges in those countries. Most of those countries, Nicaragua and Bolivia are now under complete authoritarian control.
Absolutely.
Mexico's kind of on a slippery slope. We'll see. Hopefully it recovers.
Yep.
But the United States is in danger. It's not there. But exactly what Sergio said, I think is worth defending. And I think the story of today was we've had Latinos in the United States that have defended this country, not just because we migrated to this country, or in the case of Sergio and Manny, were migrated to this country, but because their love for this country. And they continue to serve today, even if it's not in uniform. It's in all the work that they're doing here in Washington and throughout the world. But if you're new, I hope you like this episode. If you like this episode, be sure to hit the like button and drop a comment. That always helps us with the algorithm. Subscribe to the podcast. It's available on all digital platforms. But if you like it on YouTube, where you could see a little bit more of the visuals, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you listen to it on audio, Spotify is probably one of the best places to listen to it. Go ahead and subscribe on Spotify. And we'll do this. I like this chemistry. We'll bring you guys back. We'll do this again.
To come back. Yeah,
you guys have like, I think you guys have like some of the same experiences, but from different, like, what do you say? Brothers from a different mother. So
there you go.
Nicaraguan and Mexican. So we'll see you guys at the next episode. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the Border Wars Podcast and visit our website at securefreesociety.org. See you in the next episode.